to it. And of course that brings us on the place of our church order. And hopefully we will get some good questions about that. That's vital. It's vital to have an order to keep one another, to hold hands in this. The question is of course, how are we going to go about it? Which leads me to one of the best ways to get involved or to grapple with this whole issue, I believe, is of course the whole thing of church planting. And for me, this is the best link, as they asked me to speak on both of these topics. Because there's no better way of learning contextualization, of getting your eyes open to that, than endeavoring in missionary work, in really evangelism and church planting. Because you need to grapple with that then very intensely. So, but just the history, my own involvement in this grew from a desire within our congregation and the leadership's hearts to reach the people in the area surrounding our church building. It was as simple as that. So there's a picture, those of you who've been to Randburg will know this. So this is a new part of the buildings. And what we did is we got hold of all the cornerstones of churches that have closed down and, as Kat has just now say, flown into this one congregation. Of course, the Lord has blessed and we have grown. We are still growing. But yes, the cornerstones of those churches that have closed down. So on the one hand, I always, when I stop there, I remind myself it's a powerful testimony of God's grace that there's still a church after all of these years. It's on the foundation of these believers that we can still be church even today. But friends, it's also unfortunately a testimony to our lack of contextualization. Because the truth is, there's not less people living in those places where those churches have closed down. In fact, there's a lot more. We just missed that opportunity. Because we weren't ready to minister the gospel into that context. And so we didn't want to end up just another cornerstone in the next building, if there is a next building. And so what we did at first is start with translation services, but we soon realized that you can translate a sermon and you can make it understandable, but you can't translate the culture. You can't translate that. So we got many people walking into the services, attending, but then they would just leave again, come for a couple of services, then they did not stick to the community. And we tried to keep an English Bible study running, but people kept feeling that they were just tagging along. It was Afrikaans ministry for the Afrikaners, and we sort of accommodated them. And so in this process, the idea of planting a church in a new community that would be able to reach a new group of people by contextualizing the gospel and the gospel ministry was born. And our biggest challenge was, and still is in many ways, getting people to see, and of course ourselves to see, because it's in our own minds, that we have become very institutionalized. And listen gratefully to what Fia shared. Because here's the question that we got asked about the church planting, and even also ourselves. So if I spoke to people, we want to plant a church, and the first thing they will say, okay, but where are you going to meet and what time is the worship services? How are you going to get a building? Where are you going to get the pastor to do this? And we are so grateful that we had, by that time, had a lot of experience also at Kruger de Kok being able to speak into this whole thing. And he reminded us that church planting is basically what we have in Matthew 28. It's disciple making. And my friend and co-worker in the planting of Cross Culture City Church, Moses, asked me, why are you people constantly talking about Matthew 28 today? we have referred to that now so many times. I think Moses, he says there's a lot of other texts that speak into disciple making, and I think it's because we haven't been doing it really, that God wants to press that on our hearts, or that's at least true for me. But here's the thing, Matthew 28 is well known, and we all know that the only verb in that verse 19 is make disciples. That's the call. Make disciples. And here's the contextualization of all nations. We need to go to all nations. It's not just one. We need to gear ourselves that we can reach all nations in South Africa coming to our cities. We will get to that now. And then, of course, you get the participles, the three participles. They go baptizing and teaching. And here we have a call to church planting. I mean, it's as basic as this and as difficult. As you are going, Afrikaans says, al gaande, al dopende, al lerende. So it's not a quick once-off thing. It must be part of my being a disciple of Jesus myself. I'm following Jesus. All of life is my testimony. I look for every opportunity all along the way during my 24-hour day. I'm looking for opportunities to engage with this message, this wonderful message. So as I follow Him daily, I must make disciples. And I'm not doing this in isolation. I'm baptizing these people. So as we believe, baptism is the right of entry into the community. I'm baptized into Jesus Christ, and therefore into the church. And then there's a lifetime of teaching one another to observe all that Jesus has commanded us as we live in community. And one of the things He has commanded us is to go and make disciples of all nations. And this is the heart of church planting. It is being an instrument in Jesus' hand through which He gathers disciples who go on and make other disciples, who would go on and make other disciples as they are going, forming new communities into which new disciples are baptized, and where they can be taught to observe all that Jesus has commanded them to do, and then to go and make disciples. You see the circle? And yes, this leads to worship services and facilities where the church can gather, and programs to help with discipleship. And in all this, the core church planting thing is that Jesus is gathering disciples. He's gathering disciple-making disciples. It's relationships. So quickly, it's disciple-making, it's urgent. Friends, if we want to think about a growth strategy as a denomination, I think it's urgent to grapple with the whole idea of church planting. The statistics is just staggering. There are 5 million people, new people moving into the cities of the developing world every month. So Joburg is about 3.9 million people. That means every month there's a new city as big as Joburg. That's formed. That's the reality. And so how many churches ought there be in a city at that size? And even if there were one church for every 5,000 people, this means that we should be planting 1,000 urban churches in the world every month. And our country is no different. 62% of our country's population live in cities. The mean in average in the world is about 50%, but that is growing fast. And so in South Africa we have about 600,000 people annually moving into our cities. And if Joburg gets 10% of that, it is 60,000 people moving into Joburg. So that's my context. That's my reality. So if we have a church for every 1,000 people, we need 60,000 churches to be planted every year. Not 60,000. What did I say? 60. Yeah. Don't trust my statistics, please. Listen to this. It says, God in our time, this is Tim Keller saying, God in our time is moving climatically through a variety of social, political and economical factors to bring Earth's people into closer contact with one another, into greater interaction and interdependence, and into earshot of the gospel. And by this movement, God carries forward His redemptive purposes in history. The sign of our time is the city. Through worldwide migration to the city, God may be setting the stage for Christian mission's greatest and perhaps final hour. This is always striking to me. So this by no means say that we need to neglect our rural areas. Therefore, I also had an example in our exercise of that. I mean, it's significant in South Africa. I think it will still be. But the thing is, as it goes in cities, it goes in the rural areas. And so as a denomination, I believe we need to put emphasis on this work in our cities. It is a biblical church growth strategy. Paul used this. He sets a clear example in his evangelization strategy of going to cities. He goes to the largest city in the area. If he enters an area, he goes to the largest city. He plants churches in every city. Now I know city those times and our times differ. But once he has planted churches in the relevant cities of an area, he says that his work in that area is done in terms of the gospel. It's striking to say, he says, so from, at the bottom of Romans 15, so from Jerusalem all the way around to Illyricum, I have fully proclaimed the gospel of Jesus Christ. I've proclaimed it everywhere. The Afrikaans says it more clearly. It says, ek het die evangelie oral verkondig. But he hasn't been to every town and every little place in that region. He's only been to the major cities. And so what we see in the developing, by 300 after Christ, 50% of the cities, city populations was Christians. And that influenced the whole empire. We also have an example not only in Paul, but in Calvin. I have a link to an article that John Stark wrote in a magazine. John Calvin, missionary and church planter. This is incredible. This man was really a gift to the churches by God. By 1555, Calvin and his Geneva supporters had planted 5 churches in France. 4 years later, they had planted 100 churches in France. By 1562, that's 7 years later, Calvin's Geneva, with the help of some of their sister cities, had planted more than 2,000 churches in France. Calvin was the leading church planter in Europe. He led the way in every part of the process. He trained, he assessed, he sent, he counseled, corresponded with and prayed for the missionaries and church planters they sent. Let me close off, but just some very practical benefit, the reality of church planting. It says that younger adults, this is just been proven just by studies, younger adults are disproportionately found in new congregations. And it's actually very simple. Older churches, traditions, their time of worship, the length of the services, you know, that stuff that we spoke of, emotional responsiveness. Christy has shown us on that. Sermon topics, leadership style, emotional atmosphere, and thousands of other tiny customs reflect the sensibilities of leaders from an older generation who have the influence still in that church. So you will get young adults just flocking to new churches where there's the chance of them also having their voices heard. And the reality is that new residents are better reached by new congregations. And now I'm not talking about the Reformed at the start, the people traveling by at the station. I'm speaking about a non-Christian moving into a new neighborhood. It will be more easy for a church plant to reach them because they are still open, whereas a church that's been there for 50, 60, 70 years, their traditions, their culture have formed already. And the same goes for new social groups. I mean, that speaks for itself. And then just another interesting fact is that new churches, the fact is just that new churches gains more non-Christians than older churches. For a simple reason, if I come to faith, my immediate network of friends is most probably still non-Christian. And so I have a lot of contacts with non-Christians. But as we grow, we spend more time with our Christian friends, and in 3 to 5 years' time, a lot of those relationships have died off, the non-Christian relationships. So I just don't have that entry into the community, anymore. So friends, just conclusion, what does this practically mean? The only wide-scale way to bring in lots of new Christians to the body of Christ in a permanent way is to plant new churches. And that's all I have to say about that.
Question time. Anybody with a question?
Just a question, question and comment, but heard you, Thomas, referring to Calvin as a church planter, with all those statistics. If Calvin has planted so many churches as we have had or you shared with us, and well, I believe guided by his theology and how we treat the scripture and so forth, and we call ourselves Calvinistic, what is it that we are not doing right? Seeing that our churches are growing smaller and smaller by the day, and some are closing down, especially in the cities. What are we missing? What are we ignoring? That actually should be a worrying thing amongst us as we have this presentation. Is it our theology, the way we practice it? Thomas, we have read more about this, and maybe you will help us, maybe open some other ways of thinking as we approach this matter. For this is basically a worrying, a disturbing thing within our churches. We also train our students to go out and maintain that which we have, and not emphasize church planting new churches. What are we missing? That's my saying.
Thomas, a couple of years ago we had a lot of excitement about church revitalization, and Harry Leder was here to do his whole From Embers to a Flame conference and all of that. Where's the balance between church revitalization and trying to pick up, if that's the right word, a church that is in decline, and deciding to rather plant a new church in the hope that the new church will grow and eventually, I don't know, should you say replace the old church, or that the old church will close down another church? Is there a balance? Do you do both?